Good morning. Please turn with me to Romans chapter 9, actually, as we look at Romans 9 through 11 this morning. And as you can see over you, the title, Identity. And the reason why identity seemed to be an appropriate title this morning was because the further I go through Romans, the more I realized how much I actually missed, And so as I was going through this portion of Romans, chapters 9 through 11, where if we have the general outline that we talked about, the first 8 chapters or so are talking about Paul basically writing to a church he finds, we'll call it extremely encouraging. That's my paraphrase. And so encouraging that he actually wants to go see them, but he's saying there's some things in chapters 1 through 8, however, that he is cautioning them that would help them go from good to better to, as we saw in the Sermon on the Mount. Christ raises the bar. He says, be perfect, be perfect. And if that seems possible, that's kind of what he is encouraging them, that will take them from doing well to perfection, which is impossible in us by ourselves. But he's saying that's evidence of a work of the Holy Spirit. And so with that, by the time you get to chapters 9 through 11, as we mentioned, he's saying, okay, halfway through chapter 1, you're going to see some things out in the world. And you are right. Those things are weird and disgusting. But in chapter 2, like we said, he's going to be like, be careful, because those are some of the same things that you may not realize you are doing too. And that's why he's writing chapters 1 through 8. So by the time we get to 9 through 11, he's going to do it a different way, because he's going to say, in Israel, you're going to look back in history and you're going to say, how is it that they did not understand that just being the children of God was not good enough to get them a pass? Today we call it being entitled. How did they not realize how entitled they had become as his biological descendants, and not realize that that wasn't good enough to get them to their destination where they needed to be? And so now likewise, he's going to pivot on them again. He's going to help them understand by the time you get to chapter 11, be careful, because the same entitlement you see in Israel is also a pitfall for us today. Thus, the concept of identity took me back to chapter 1 and the very first verse. We're not going to have a whole lot of verses and overlays today, because honestly, I've been pulled in a lot of different directions. And usually my job as a preacher is to make sure that whatever I have conceptualized in the form of notes are actually consistent with what the Word of God says. And then likewise, you got a study guide out there. So when we're going in a small group, our small group leaders have an idea of what the guide actually has to do with the biblical text. I'm going to confess this morning, they're all still going in 3 different directions. So I just had to pick one to preach from. And so we're going to see, but hopefully the study guide today, if you go to a small group, will give you a conversation starter more than anything else, because I can guarantee it's not going to be completely consistent with the way the lesson will develop. But the bottom line is, likewise, it shows itself up in the slides. You're not going to have very many slides today. So please just follow me through these passages as we see the way in which Paul starts out this letter with a single verse that helps us understand that he was not just confident, but he was accurate in his self-awareness, in his identity. And that is one of the reasons why he had credibility by the time he starts telling them in chapters 9 through 11, be careful of whether or not you have an accurate sense of identity. Why? Because I can have confidence in my identity. I can have a strong sense of identity, but guess who else has a strong sense of identity? The devil knows exactly who he is. And he has a strong sense of identity. But it's not an accurate sense of who he should be. And that's what Paul does in the very first verse. He doesn't just have a strong sense of identity. He has an accurate sense of identity in chapter 1, verse 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 1, if you turn there with me. Where it reads, Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, tier 1 of his identity, called to be an apostle, that's a role, that's not an identity, set apart for the gospel of God, that's a mission, or that's a purpose. And so just in that verse, I might be making too much of this, but we have a man who has a fundamental sense of his identity. He's a servant. He does not let his role as an apostle confuse him as to what he's supposed to be as a servant of God at all times. Why does that matter? Because by the time we get to chapter 9, the part we've seen already is he's going to help them understand. The way that Israel strayed into having an inflated sense of self was you're going to see 3 folks from their history. We've already looked at it from the perspective of Isaac versus Ishmael. I want to look at it from the perspective of Hagar this time, right? But beyond that, we also saw Jacob and Esau. The line of the Christ went through only one of the biological descendants. We saw that. That was Jacob, not Esau. So I want to look at Esau and the way he got those things out of order, and it might have a lot to do with why he's used as an example of be careful of understanding your identity at all times. And then likewise, Pharaoh is used as an example. The one consistent thing for all of them is whether or not you are the mother of a distinguished child, because Ishmael was going to be a distinguished child. It's always important to keep at the top of your identity. We say it all the time. It sounds cliche, but you're a servant first. You're a servant first. Whether or not you are the heir, the oldest, the one who's got top billing, you have to always remember that you are a servant first. And whether or not you rise to be Pharaoh of whatever it is you're Pharaoh of, you first have to recognize you are a servant above all things. We're going to see 3 different ways that cause them problems, because Paul always got it. He always made sure he understood, first, I am a servant, called to be an apostle. Hagar, on the other hand, this is going to be story time, y'all. Story time once again. Hagar, because she got the chance to be the mother of the firstborn of Abraham, eventually seemed to lose track of the fact that at the end of the day, in terms of her identity, was she the wife now? Was she the wife? Thank you. Thanks. You can wait, do that more, right? That's the right answer. I'm going to put it in modern terms. She was the side piece. But part of the conflict was she started acting like the wife. And so because she was blessed to have a child, she didn't realize that God never changed her identity. She was literally the servant. That never changed. But her confidence level got to the point where she started looking down on the actual wife. And understand in life, why is that not me just picking at Hagar? It's because we can do the same things. I can become so adjacent to the person who is actually in authority that I confuse myself with being them. And it's like Icarus, the higher I fall, the closer I get to that thing that's going to remind me. How did the story of Hagar end up? She replaced Sarah, right? Good luck with that. No. She allowed her new role as a mother in the household to actually engage in a pattern of behavior that ended up leading her to the door, right? And so it's one of the reasons why I look at Paul and his strong sense of identity. And one of the things is, people, look, y'all get sick of me at any time. I say it all the time. I am freshening that up. Last time I said it might have been around Christmas, right? Y'all get sick of me at any time. I could be gone. That's just real. But the bottom line is, I don't want to give you an unnecessary reason for me to have to endure unnecessary struggle. And so at your job, it's not like Christ is promising you that if you do all these things right, you're going to move through. And you're not going to move up the ladder. That's most of his apostles. That was the example. They had to end up starting over again. Paul much? Paul, speaking more of the truth, had him booted out of all the places he used to be accepted in. So this is not a manual for upward mobility. It's a manual because Paul did not have to hang his head in shame once he started getting the boot. Because he got the boot for the right reasons. Hagar, on the other hand, got it twisted. Her proximity to power got her the boot unnecessarily. It didn't have to go that way. And so the first thing to realize is my proximity is not power. God still ordains the order. And until you get the ring, like I'm not a Beyonce fan, until they put a ring on it, you ain't the wife, right? And so that's the thing that Hagar got twisted about her identity. Ultimately, what happened was she thought that as she was coming into more and more privilege, that ultimately she had a change in status that God never gave her. And that's a lesson we talked about going all the way back to my first lessons with y'all with David. David had to understand how to handle both being a fugitive and a king. And that's the same thing with all of us, because the Bible talks about it all the time. He who is faithful over a little, he'll make you ruler over much. And so once again, Romans is giving us a picture, this time through the perspective of Hagar, how once again, they got left out of the line of the actual promise because they didn't understand how to handle success. And that is the same thing that God is testing me on. I pray for new levels all the time. The young people are doing new things, right? We're praying for God willing success over there. Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm wearing a church t-shirt. I got to preach it. Didn't even talk about it. Miss Caitlin has one. I got a box over there right next to Mom. We got a whole bunch of t-shirts because God willing, as we showed them to the elders this morning, we're trying to do some new things that will, God willing, reach out into new places in this community. And even if you don't ever decide you want to start a conversation with anybody about Jesus, hopefully this little verse right here, Sometimes there's an event, somebody's like, that's kind of small now. No, I was kind of rushed. So the verse stays small, but sometimes that can have an added benefit. Because as they're looking closer, maybe that's a conversation starter. You might not have it I was watching the web, and they have the pop the balloon shows now where you get, well, okay, not everybody watches the same thing I watch on YouTube, where they got one person trying to figure out of 20 people which one they want to date, and then you pop your balloon anyway. There's one of the people I was like, that's an amazing line. I don't even like lines. That's a great line though, right? Likewise, you might not have a great introductory statement to start a conversation about Jesus, but sometimes maybe it's just your gear can start a conversation that can help you point somebody to somebody else who, right? It's a team effort. So that's what we're doing right now. But understand, as we grow, there is danger in growth, God willing, that he'll bless us with the growth. And sometimes he'll have us in a holding pattern until we can realize not to repeat the mistake of, right, a Hagar, making too much of the success that he will give us, so much so that we will end up self-destructing, because that's what Hagar ended up doing with her newfound role in the household. She ended up self-destructing. She ain't the only one, though. Esau, we've already talked about Esau. He did the same thing. But look, like we said, he was supposed to always remember he was a servant. But there's another part of being a servant beyond just the term. It goes to that other biblical concept. It's a stewardship. As a servant, you got to appreciate what you have. Why? Because how could I possibly mess this up? That is an amazing question that God is about to answer for me. And understand how Esau, when you think of messing up a birthright or an inheritance, give me your second story that you remember. Exactly. It is hard to mess up. That's why Esau still stands out in my mind. And I have a hard time thinking of second place. Because you're right. God might have given you a blessing that is so secure, it might seem impossible to lose until he shows you just how possible it is. Because you do not look at the rights you have in your role as firstborn or whatever without the level of stewardship that helps you realize even though you don't see how you can lose it, God can show you at any time. And so that's the next thing you have to understand. Well, you've got a great blessing. It's the level of appreciation. We've already talked about the appetite before. He disregarded it so much that a bowl of lentils, it wasn't even no meat in it right? I'm sorry. As far as I know, it was just vegetables. And you can begin to assume your status or your new status so much that it just becomes, it's just there. But one of the added advantages to taking on the role of a servant is if you are a servant, as you begin to grow, you don't just think of what you're entitled to in the new role. You think of what my responsibility is with that new power to the people around me. And so that keeps you from thinking about it. It's boring for me. I just have it, right? If you're thinking about the ways in which I can sometimes it's just the simple things that God gives to us to help us stay engaged. Like we talk about, I use the concept of muscle memory all the time. I use all athletic metaphors because I'm a has-been athlete. And that's the way it stands out to me. But if you are running, I had to apologize because I missed somebody's play. But we had a play I went to not long ago. One of our students, or friends of one of our students. And those students, likewise, you think they just get, I listened to Frozen and now I'm going to say my lines. No, right? Just like as an athlete, you had to run and do some things that kept you healthy and got you prepared. They have to run those lines. And so when you see one of our students or people getting up on stage, that takes something. And so God is sometimes helping you. There's some things that might sound goofy to us just sitting here, but because I know I'm not going to have to be on stage, it's like, whatever. But you told me I'm going to have to be on stage in front of mama and daddy and the whole city, and I take all those little simple things that might, right? It's a memory tool. I'm walking around looking goofy so that I don't look goofy in the wrong moments, right? And so that's when the simple daily routines matter. And so understand, when he is calling us to be a servant, it's not just so I can, once again, check off another box on the list of Christian things to do. He is helping to condition me to not take lightly the stewardship that goes with whatever elevated role he's about to, God willing, promote me into so I can avoid the second way of potentially self-destructing. Because who did it to Esau? Esau, he had some help, but he was the great hunter. Jacob wasn't going to make him give him the birthright. He had to agree. And so it wasn't taken by force. It was compromised twice. And even though he had some help, he was the one who, I sometimes have to look in the mirror and say, I've done it to myself. And so God is helping us see another way of avoiding self-destruction by losing track of. I'm first and foremost a servant. And servant means my gifts and my talents aren't just for me. They are to help keep me in the practice of appreciating what they can do for other people. And so by helping other people, I'm getting in the practice of not losing appreciation for what I've got. But Pharaoh, as we remember, was a third example from that. He wasn't in the line of anything. He was just kind of an outlier. He didn't even have a possibility of being born into the line of the Christ. But that didn't matter because Christ had what they call some allies. When they were going to build the temple, there was a man by the name of Hiram, king of Tyre. He wasn't in the line of Israel either. But he helped their greatest king build, at that time, their greatest monument, the temple. And he was highly regarded as a man of honor. And understand, likewise, it started out that way in Egypt too. The Pharaoh that he's talking about here in Romans chapter 9, it's not the same Pharaoh who basically handed over responsibility to Joseph once he saw what Joseph could do. And so understand the heyday of Egypt, when they survived the famine, when other nations were potentially in peril, it's that servant model again. If he remembers that he's a servant, he doesn't necessarily have to understand all the long-range implications of just being a decent person and empowering the gifts that God, or those the gifted among him, that God had given him, to basically just do what God had given them the power to do. He ended up picking the man who was going to help save Egypt and the surrounding regions because he thought about it. He didn't necessarily know what the outcome is. And so there are times when we see God, the whole concept, we talk about that Hebrew word, aharit. God sees the end of a thing from the beginning. That's one of the reasons why it's important to trust his counsel. Because just like in running lines, you might see somebody who's going around, seems like they're talking to themselves, much like, who was it? Not the same, but as our sister Hannah, but Hannah, when she was praying in the temple, thought she had a little too much to drink. No. She's about to get an answered prayer, bruh. And it might look odd to you right now, but when God answers, okay. And so sometimes you have to, we talked about it before, you have to go through those periods where you look a little bit different because all the other people who are doing things normal ain't about to get the answer you're going to get. And so that is one of the things that it helps to understand. And so these people are all Pharaoh. Do you think that one Pharaoh could have been, there's no way I'm going to let one of these Hebrews run my country? He could have done that and starved just like everybody else. Guess who took on that attitude? Another Pharaoh after Joseph passed. And as we talked about, that was the gateway to them having his whole army ending up at the bottom of the Red Sea. But before that, the thing that ended up making his misidentification of the Hebrew people and the role that they were really supposed to play in Egypt, the only thing that gives it life is you can think all day on a thing, but your actions are what matters. And that's the danger, right, of marinating on the wrong type of thinking, because what he then began to do is this is what stood out to me this week. It's going to be a whole different sermon. I think I started to understand legalism from a different perspective this week, because what Pharaoh started to do was based upon him, lost his identity as a servant, or so it would seem, and now he's just the ruler, right? And so now here's the danger in that. Based upon me losing touch of the fact that I'm supposed to be looking out for the people and empowering the people who are basically in my workforce, and now I'm attacking them, now I'm starting to make rules, bricks without straw. Does that really help your workforce? Thank you. But it just seems to, when you start making up the rules as you go along, it just seemed like a clever thing to do. And understand, one of the things that God is helping me to do, and he helps me to remember, if you don't lose track of, we talked about due north on our moral compass, let's add this to due north on our moral compass. If I keep my identity as a servant as due north on my moral compass, it'll keep me from self-destructing by creating rules and limitations on others that would actually help me grow. See, he could have taken the baton from all that Joseph did for the nation and realized, oh, wait a minute, God's still blessing these people. And maybe our blessings are connected to theirs. But see, God understands me because he understands. I can criticize you for your insecurities all day long, but I don't really know you. I know my insecurities. And so God helping me to simply remember that I'm a servant helps me overcome the times I will be self-destructive by putting artificial limits on you in a situation where we could really just be helping each other. And so this time, he is helping me understand how my personal insecurities can make me self-destructive if I'm not careful. And what's the key? Due north on your compass. Is the thing that you're doing related to you being a servant? Are you actually making the people around you better? And the illustration I thought about this was, I say from time to time, I'm going to borrow an old illustration. I so badly don't even want to say the names. But we had a player of the year out of the Palouse, out of WSU, about a year or two ago. So much so that his coach and that whole staff got a promotion. Because WSU was pretty good a couple years ago. And I was like, well, why did they change coaches? The coach got a promotion. Because there was one player who was absolutely killing it. He was playing the game a very different way than it's traditionally played right now. And that got him and the team a lot of recognition. But what happened was, as the coach got a promotion, the player went to another place, and he had to fit a system that did not fit his actual talents. And now, I'm not going to tell you what ended up happening, but that new team had a lot more talent, but a lot more struggles as well. And I really just need to tell the story because it's obscure, it's vague right now, but his new team didn't make the tournament, and his coach ended up getting fired at the end of the year or having to retire. Because instead of taking the player and putting him in the same opportunities that the previous coach had, he was doing what they call overcoaching. And if you've ever been overcoached, you also know you can have the same temptation to do the same thing. You can try to put too much control over a talented player, position, figure it out, that you begin to, as Pharaoh did, self-destruct. And so understand that as God is preparing us for new opportunities, if you know what it's like to have artificial constraints put on you when you're trying to run with both feet and both hands, fully enabled in the authority that God has given you, then understand when you get put in a position, the same position as that coach might, the reason why God is giving you the experience to live under, he literally says in Peter's epistle, one of his first epistle, you get no stripes for working for a good boss. Everybody wants a good boss. You should thrive under a good boss. See, you grow and mature by working in difficult situations where you're in the three-legged race, right? You're running with people, but y'all ain't at your full maximum capability. Why? Because God wants to promote you, and he does not want to repeat unhealthy cycles of leadership. And so understand with that, one of the reasons to thank God to the degree we have leadership that allows us the freedom to do certain things. It's that question we've gone back to from the very beginning. What's my God-given identity? And how does that relate to the way that people see me? Because sometimes I see God as a limiting factor in my life. He's got all these rules and these do's and don'ts. And the older I've grown, I've said it before, I start to look at those things as counsel. But when I look at his laws as just rules and limitations, I forget the freedom that they are designed to give me. Why? Because, like I say, these are stories. This is an encyclopedia of success and failure. And so the people like the Davids, you can't unwrite the history. It's like you can't really unring the bell or undo the scoreboard. Some of the most successful people in this book were those who found the value in just doing the things. Brother was talking about simplicity. Just simply doing the things that God is asking you to do. I say it all the time. It's one of my dead horse issues. He's not called called. Anyway, one of the things that he's celebrated for in his title, as Isaiah the prophet said, is Wonderful Counselor. And so he has counseled all these people over the ages to greater and greater success simply through the humility that they have to look at his rules and say whether or not, that's why the faith matters. That's why so much of Romans is faith, because I'm not going to see the value in it when I first start obeying. It's not really designed that way. Sometimes I see the value in it after I've begun to walk with him. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm really tempted to take another tangent right now. No tangents. I can actually get us out of here. I don't know. I didn't start the clock. But the bottom line is Pharaoh began to legislate. And he began to legislate from a place of insecurity. And so he began to make up stuff. And what happens is there are these side effects. And the ripple effects are really the danger in that whole concept of when I start making up stuff out of a place of insecurity. It's a story that I'm not going to tell the story now. Okay. I'll tell the story now. Okay. So when I was looking for this, sometimes the illustrations, it seems like God just drops them on you. And I was like, man, I know that's happened somewhere. I just don't remember where it's happened. Not seeing the downrange effects, the aharit of the thing that I'm doing now. And I ended up pulling up this story of this one ecosystem. I was like, oh, it's the environment. I can't talk about the environment. But it was a place where they had gotten into the habit of hunting the wolves because they were such a pest in terms of trying to, take care of crops and things like that, that they didn't see downrange. I wouldn't have seen it unless they had done it and they wrote a story about it in whatever magazine I was reading. But they didn't see downrange how killing the wolves exploded the population of whatever it was the wolves ate, on down about 3 more lines until it caused an explosion in the population of mosquitoes. And so I was like, I can use that one. God, I don't know anybody who has a great love for mosquitoes. And so ultimately, that's what happens when I start making, it seemed like, let's just get rid of these wolves because, the Bible, I got a couple Bible verses that tells you about how bad wolves are. Problem is, God made them. And they have a role in his ecosystem that I don't see until the mosquitoes every day are ouch, right? And so that's the danger of making stuff up as I go along. I am not the creator. I'm in my best when I'm just focused enough to stay in my lane and let the creator guide me so that I can appreciate, oh God, thank you for keeping me from picking up my strap and going to get a couple more wolves because now I appreciate why, right? And so I don't have to go through that period of time where now we're trying to go through mosquito control because we ain't as good at doing it as that line of that team that God had assembled to make sure that they never got out of control in the first place. My brothers reminded me, at some point this sermon has to end. I think, let's read Romans 10 and see where it fits. Romans 10, 1 through 3, I think it fits somewhere. Brothers, my heart's desire. It is. Look at brothers listening back there. He's anticipating. Let's go. By far, Romans 10, 1 through 3, I think applies to this. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved, for I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness. And that's the fundamental principle of the identity crisis that I thank my brother for remembering. That actually comes from the Word, and that is the caution that he is giving them here in these 3 chapters of Romans, where he's saying, we've already talked about it before, your birth order or your birth is not going to entitle you to a strong finish with God. Likewise, the danger can be in trying to assume so much about my role that I lose my identity and I begin to take on the responsibility, the mission. Paul said, my identity is a servant, my role is an apostle, and I have no business making up laws. But when I get it out of order, like we saw in Hagar, like we saw in Esau, like we saw in Pharaoh, then I begin to become so comfortable with my position that I begin to make up laws, and I start to lose track of downrange. I cannot see the outcomes of the things that I'm changing in God's spiritual environment any more than we could see. And there are other examples. I wanted a new one because I used to use the Dust Bowl as an example. The Dust Bowl was another one of those downrange things where the last time, the Great Depression, there hadn't been another one. It was one of those downrange things that was contributed to by some things that we didn't really see that were going on and some changes we were making in the way that we did things. We thought we could make a few more dollars by over-farming the land, doing better than it had before, and then it created in certain areas. Okay, let me not even go into that. Okay. But we have other parts of history that show you different imbalances. Look up your own. Look up your own. Don't worry about mine. But think wolves, mosquitoes, Dust Bowl, double check me on it, Beard Berean. And the bottom line is us. And so one of the reasons God is giving us this guidance in Romans is say, yes, look, understand that throughout their history, there are different periods where if you look at the study guide, this is where I'm going to try to help get back in line with what folks will have to talk about in the study guide if they so choose, is it's almost like one of the other things I thought about was it reminded me of A Christmas Carol. Because he's going to say, it's not just Pharaoh that got into the habit of just arbitrarily making up stuff when he felt like could nobody change the rules, right? Israel did the same thing going back in the day when you look at them coming out of the land of Egypt. And it's that whole concept of what was the net effect, what they didn't realize they were doing. If you go back, and I might as well just turn the pages. If you go back to Genesis, you go back to really just go back to Numbers. Go back to Numbers with me, if you will. Numbers 14. Numbers 14. Israel also fell into the habit of taking actions for which they did not appreciate the full consequences. Numbers 14, verses 1 and 2, it's going to say, Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, Would that we have died in the land of Egypt, or would that we have died in the wilderness. This is one of the famous or many instances in which they had gotten frustrated along the path out of slavery. But understand the thing that they did not see is later on in the chapter where verse 26 is going to say, And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, How long shall this wicked congregation grumble against who? Grumble against who? Against who? Me. Who's me? Thank you, right? Against the Lord. I have heard the grumblings of this people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them, As I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing, I will do to you. Your dead body shall fall in the wilderness, and of all your numbers listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. And so understand, one of the things I really had to begin to realize as I was going back through the book of Romans, and it was pointing me back to these stories, is I do not understand the aharit. We say it all the time. When you are a true believer in God, you may do some things that upset me. But at the end of the day, that does not mean that God has removed his Holy Spirit from you. You, right? And so I have to be careful of my response, because by the time you get to chapter 12, and he's talking about your practical responses, 3 times in different ways he's going to say, never avenge yourselves, because you don't see the aharit. One of the ways I can self-destruct is taking it out on you when I think you've done something wrong, and I might have it wrong. Because even if I'm right, I got to make sure I'm more righteous than you when I'm getting even. You think God's just going to let me get away with lashing out on you and violating his word so I can get my justice now? No, he's fair. And so even if I get it right, to the degree I've taken it out on you, it's coming back too. Thank you. You don't have to say it. Oh, but woe is me when I get it wrong. Woe is me when I get it wrong. And that's what's happening here. I don't realize that there are times when the word or the thing that you might be trying to tell me, that's coming from God. And so I know you would never issue a coarse word against God. You wouldn't complain. You wouldn't say a word. But God tests, because just like by the time we get to the end of the entire story, what I call his last will and testament, not the Great Commission, but he's talking about who lines up. We got the sheep and we got the goats, right? And ultimately he says, Lord, when did we see you sick or this and this and that and do nice things for you as much as you did to the least of these? I don't see what part of my brother and sister is actually directly coming from God. I just know that there are some times when the sermon it actually goes right. I was like, that wasn't me. That wasn't in the outline. That wasn't in note, right? And likewise, there are times when the word says, you ain't got to be a preacher to feel that. He says a good answer or a wise answer comes from the Lord. That's Proverbs. And so there are times when God is bringing me a word through my brother and sister, trying to find out what my attitude is towards the truth. Because he knew if he brought it through a powerful enough voice, if he brought it through one of the elders, of course Mark is going to listen. If he brought it through such and such, of course Mark is going to listen. But I want to know if you have a value for the truth as opposed to the messenger. I want to see if you value the truth regardless of the role of the person coming to talk to you. Understand, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. We have to go through the other ones kind of quick. But by the time you get to Ezekiel, let's go to Ezekiel really quickly. Ezekiel 13. Ezekiel 13. And this really goes back to the whole concept of the imbalance that we can sometimes create in the environment. We become too comfortable with our ability to make rules, to make things up as we go along. Verse 22 of Ezekiel 13 is going to say, because you have disheartened the righteous falsely, although I have not grieved him, and you have encouraged the wicked, that he should not turn from his evil way to save his life. Therefore you shall no more see false visions, nor practice divination. I will deliver my people out of your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. He's talking to false prophets there of three different types, if you go back and look at the entirety of chapter 13. But one of the reasons why it's so important for God to be able to guide me into an understanding of who I need to be encouraging is we're talking about wrapping this thing up and moving into new things. The T-shirts don't matter if I am not out there with God guiding me in the wisdom to see who really needs my encouragement, Lord, and who needs me to tell the truth no matter how it might sound, right? Because anytime I get it out of balance, I'm still doing, I'm throwing God's plan into imbalance either way. We talked about it before. I mentioned it a little bit last week. The pressure of the repercussions they can come when you start telling the truth. It's one thing, I can be idealistic right out the gate. But once you really start feeling those scars and the repercussions, the isolation and all that, then you can get beaten down into a quiet corner that just says, shut up. Just shut up. But if God's not the one telling you to be quiet, you're still not accomplishing your mission. You might quite possibly be throwing things into an imbalance, right? Because it's one thing if I'm shooting too many wolves. It's another thing if I'm letting the wolves run roughshod all over Lewiston and we ain't got no boundaries for them, right? Because that creates another problem. Because not only am I the one who is going to be frightened of the repercussions, if I don't stand in the place where God has told me to stand, it's like you remember that story of the little boy who held his finger in the, right? So that the flood would not cause the entire levee to break. If I don't stand up and put my finger in the levee, everybody else has problems. And so even though there is a wisdom in silence, I need to constantly ask God, is that your silence or is that just me being a coward? Because I know me. I know me. I know all the fights I ran from when I was a kid. I know all the ones I still probably run from today, not because I'm a holy man, but because I don't like that matchup, right? Because it's easy to be holy when you're right. Yeah, exactly, when you need an excuse. The bottom line is God knows your courage, and he knows when you are using your role as, right, an excuse for inaction. And so one of the things I'm asking us to do as we go forward, God willing, we will have success as the young people venture out into new territory that God willing will bless us all. Hopefully it'll be just an example of all the different ways we can individually branch out, but God willing, never losing sight of first of all, our identity as a servant, right? Because as God begins to bless us with new roles and new opportunities in places, that is the one thing that is going to keep us in the habit of maintaining the kind of humility that people find attractive in an area where, or in an era where, you find a lot of humility out around you when you're just walking around? Thank you. And I can't necessarily, like I said, once again, I can't say I'm not a businessman, but I do know that it does not necessarily make a whole lot of sense to reproduce the same old product in the same old market that is already saturated by another business. A lot of times you're going to do your best growth in a place where a market's not saturated. You have something different to offer people. And one of the frustrating things can be, in a time where pride and arrogance and seems to be just about everywhere, it's frustrating to deal with, but that's a new market. So if you can demonstrate humility, you don't have to necessarily have a lesson put together. It's the simplicity of people being able to see your character and maybe a flashy new T-shirt. That'll be your right attention getter to open the door that if, right, we got our identity as a servant down and our new role, whatever it is down, then we can march off in new directions that God might open up for us. Because like I said, this morning, every week, the weekly practice is, Marcus, the notes, that's your thoughts, got to line up with the word, what the word actually says. And you got to be able to communicate in a way that the small group leaders can actually lead a small group. None of that happened, right? Eric didn't get the small group guide this morning because it was done on Friday. But I was like, wait a minute, there ain't a whole lot of verses on that. Sometimes you just have to walk forward in faith and ask God to at least let something good come out of it. And God willing, as we move forward in different areas, that is the attitude that we will take. And so, like we said before, that God, one of the reasons why sometimes it's good that I'm stumbling. Because if I was running too smooth in my own direction, then I'd start thinking it was me. I just want to develop the kind of character that God wants to bless. So that whether I'm stumbling or whether or not I'm in a week where I'm in the best of my outline, God is blessing the results of what I'm doing. I pray the same thing for you. As I sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God help us have not just a strong identity, but an accurate sense of identity, so you will be encouraged to see us as the kind of people whose work you want to bless. As we together stand and sing. Breathe on me, breath.